It is April 1945. A small German city near Heilbronn sits under a gray spring sky, waiting for the final artillery barrage of the war. Red Cross flags drape over the brick facade of a massive civilian hospital, holding 400 helpless patients, from infants to the chronically ill. But on the roof of that hospital, young boys and old men crouch behind sandbags with rifles aimed at the American lines. The city mayor has turned a sanctuary of healing into a fortress, betting that American decency will keep the tanks away. He is wrong. General George S. Patton is already moving, and his answer will not involve a single shell hitting those red-crossed roofs. This is the story of what Patton did when a Nazi mayor used a hospital as a shield, and how American soldiers found a tunnel that bypassed it entirely. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show how some weapons require a soldier to break first. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Murphy was 41 years old, a career infantry battalion commander from Chicago, Illinois, serving with the 7th Army. He had commanded men through the rocky hills of Sicily, the mud of Italy, the forests of France, and now into the heart of Germany. 12 continuous months of combat had etched deep lines around his eyes and stripped away any tolerance for meaningless waste. He had seen too many men die in the final weeks of a war that was already functionally over. Now, standing on a ridge, looking through his binoculars at the city, he refused to let his battalion be slaughtered just to satisfy the suicidal fantasies of a desperate fanatic. The man across the lines was Otto Brandt, 58 years old, the Nazi Party district leader and local mayor since 1935. Brandt wore a tailored uniform with polished leather boots, a fanatic who had spent the last decade overseeing the deportation of 240 Jewish residents from his district to the extermination camps in the east. With the Red Army closing in from one side and Patton from the other, Brandt had conscripted every remaining male between 14 and 60 into the Volkssturm militia. He had even placed his own 16-year-old son on the hospital roof with a sniper rifle. Brandt possessed no real military experience, only an unyielding political conviction and a calculated desire to cement his name into the myths of a dying regime. By April 1945, the German war machine was fracturing into isolated, desperate pockets of resistance across the European continent. The Allied armies had crossed the Rhine, slicing through the remaining defenses and leaving the traditional lines of communication in complete tatters. In this chaotic atmosphere of total collapse, local Nazi officials often operated with absolute autonomy, completely detached from any centralized military command or realistic strategy. Small cities became personal fiefdoms where fanatical party leaders could dictate terms of life and death to terrified civilian populations and demoralized soldiers alike. In the weeks leading up to this confrontation, several American officers in neighboring sectors had allowed similar situations to slide into brutal, grinding stalemates. Faced with fortified towns and the threat of severe civilian casualties, they had chosen to pause their advance, waiting for heavy artillery or air support to level the obstacles. This cautious approach frequently played directly into the hands of the defenders, who used the delays to reinforce their positions or execute scorched earth policies before retreating. The regular rules of engagement were being used as leverage by an enemy that had long since abandoned its own adherence to international law. Now, the momentum of the entire regional advance depended on finding a solution that did not involve reducing another historic city to rubble. An American captain advanced toward the western edge of the city, under a white flag, meeting the German lines near the outer checkpoint. He requested an immediate audience with the civilian authority to negotiate a peaceful surrender. Otto Brandt walked out to meet him, flanked by 2 armed guards, his uniform immaculate, despite the dust of the surrounding ruins. The American captain spoke calmly, stating that the city was completely cut off and that further resistance would only lead to unnecessary destruction. Brandt smiled coldly, shaking his head. He stated that the city would be defended street by street, house by house, until the very last man fell. The captain reminded the mayor that the primary assault route passed directly alongside the city hospital, which was packed with hundreds of wounded and sick people. Brandt replied that the hospital was an excellent shield, noting that his snipers on the roof had a perfect view of the approaching roads. The American captain grew stern, reminding the mayor that using a medical facility to harbor combatants was a direct violation of the Geneva Convention and the laws of land warfare. Brandt laughed, stating that international laws were written by the weak and that the Americans would never risk the bad publicity of blowing up a building flying the Red Cross. He declared that his radio operators were already prepared to broadcast across Europe the moment the first American shell touched the hospital walls. The captain realized the mayor was entirely indifferent to the lives of his own people and was actively seeking a bloody propaganda victory. He cut the conversation short, stating that the responsibility for what followed would rest entirely on the mayor's shoulders. Brandt watched him leave, confident that his calculation had paralyzed the American advance. The captain returned to the battalion command post and immediately detailed the mayor's threats to the staff. He explained that a standard frontal assault would force them to fire directly into the hospital structure. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy listened, reviewed the engineering reports, and decided the situation required an entirely different approach. The report detailing the hostage hospital and the mad mayor reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His jeep ground to a halt outside the command tent, the 4 silver stars on his helmet gleaming under the overcast sky. He stepped out smoothly, the ivory grips of his revolvers resting against his hips as he walked past the saluting guards. The general stepped inside the command post unannounced, his presence instantly tightening the air in the room. He did not look angry. He looked entirely cold, his eyes fixed on the map laid across the central table. Patton looked up at Murphy and asked if the German mayor had refused the surrender terms. Murphy answered that the mayor had refused completely. Patton asked if the man was using the hospital patients as cover for his riflemen. Murphy confirmed that the snipers were active on the roof. Patton studied the map, his finger tracing the line of the old coal transit tunnel that ran directly beneath the hospital foundation. He asked if the engineering reports guaranteed the underground passage was clear and structurally sound. Captain Lindstrom stepped forward, stating that her reconnaissance teams had verified the tunnel was entirely unobstructed. Patton turned his gaze to the officers, his voice quiet but sharp. He stated that the German commander believed he was playing a game of chicken with American morality. He noted that the mayor had calculated his defenses based on the assumption that his enemy would either slaughter the innocent or retreat in fear. Patton explained that a true soldier does not waste lives to satisfy a fanatic's desire for a dramatic martyrdom. He stated that the tunnel was not just a tactical shortcut, but a complete rejection of the enemy's trap. He declared that they would not fire a single bullet at the hospital because they were going to walk right under it. He told Murphy to take his battalion through the dark, seize the town square, and pull the rug out from under the mayor's feet. Murphy saluted, the orders set. The assault began exactly at 3 o'clock in the morning under a moonless sky. Captain Lindstrom led the engineering teams into the dark mouth of the coal tunnel, checking the damp brickwork for mines or hidden traps. Finding none, 2 full companies of Murphy's infantry battalion filed into the freezing underground passage, moving in absolute silence beneath the feet of the sleeping hospital patients above. By 4 o'clock, the lead elements emerged into the basement of an abandoned factory, well behind the German defensive perimeter. They organized quickly in the shadows, fixing bayonets and checking their sights. At dawn, the Americans launched a sudden, violent assault on the town hall from the east. The Volkssturm militia, staring south through their sniper scopes toward an attack that never came, panicked as American troops flooded the central square behind them. The elderly men dropped their rifles, and the Hitler Youth boys fled into the alleys. Murphy's men surrounded the town hall and fired 3 heavy tank rounds through the front doors, killing the remaining guards inside. Otto Brandt was dragged from the burning building, bleeding from a shrapnel wound but alive, while his son descended from the hospital roof to surrender to the engineers. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Murphy returned to Chicago after the war, leaving the Army behind to build a quiet life in civilian engineering. He became a prominent city planner, specializing in massive urban infrastructure projects and underground transit systems, until his death in 1994. Captain Anna Lindstrom returned to Minneapolis, joining the Municipal Engineering Department where she designed the city's subterranean networks throughout the 1960s, dying in 1998 with a Bronze Star in her drawer. Both officers spent their peacetime careers shaped by the night they used a hidden map to save 400 lives. Otto Brandt stood trial before an American military government court late in 1945, where his political record caught up with him. Convicted of ordering the deportations of the town's Jewish residents, he was sentenced to 25 years in a military prison and died behind bars in 1956. His son emigrated to Ohio in 1955, working as a high school mathematics teacher, and never once speaking to his colleagues about the day he held a rifle on a hospital roof. General Patton never mentioned the tunnel operation in his public press conferences, choosing to leave the details in an official report filed neatly in his personal desk. He wrote a single line in a letter to his wife the following evening, noting that the finest victories are those won by outthinking the monster, rather than matching his cruelty. Some historians have argued that Patton's decision to bypass the hospital was a reckless gamble that relied too heavily on unverified civilian infrastructure. They suggest that a more conventional siege would have forced a quicker civilian surrender without risking an entire battalion in an unmonitored underground bottleneck. Others have argued the opposite, praising the maneuver as a masterpiece of tactical flexibility that preserved both the rules of war and hundreds of innocent lives. What is certain is that the hospital survived the final days of the conflict completely untouched, providing a durable testament to an army that chose imagination over senseless destruction. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have ordered a standard frontal assault? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about how some weapons require a soldier to break first, make sure to subscribe.